Okay, everybody, it's 12 o'clock. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We're excited to spend the next hour discussing a topic that touches every school building every day, the doors. Doors are often thought of as a simple building component, but during an emergency, they become critical pieces of a school security strategy. Today, we'll examine new research, discuss what those findings mean, and explore practical ways schools can strengthen preparedness without losing sight of life safety, operations, or design. Before we begin,
So, joining me today are three outstanding professionals who each bring a different perspective to school security. Joe Luterio is a research associate with the Alert Center at Texas State University. Joe has been directly involved in the research we'll discuss today. Laura Fry Weaver, is president of the Door Opening Industry Training Group. I've spent nearly 4 decades working with doors, hardware, life safety, accessibility, and security. Ben Crum is president of the Architectural Security Design Group and specializes in crime prevention through environmental design, commonly known as SEPDED. Together, we'll move from research to practical applications to design strategies. Here's where we're headed today. Our discussion follows a logical progression. We'll begin by asking what the research tells us. Then we'll examine what those findings mean for door systems and school operations. Finally, we'll zoom out and look at how the overall environment can support security preparedness. Each section builds on the previous one. So before we talk about research, let's ask a simple question. Every day, hundreds of doors throughout a school quietly perform critical jobs. They keep authorized people out. They allow students and staff to move safely throughout the building. They compartmentalize spaces. They support evacuation. They provide emergency responder access. During an emergency, however, those same openings suddenly become one of the most important components in the entire security plan. The question isn't whether a school has doors. The question is whether those doors will actually perform when they're needed. That leads us to one of the most important ideas that we'll discuss today. Policies are important, training is important, communication is important, lockdown procedures are important, emergency response is important, but eventually every one of those strategies reaches a physical opening. At some point, someone has to secure a classroom, someone has to control access, someone has to move safely through a doorway. That's why today's discussion focuses on the opening itself, not because it's the only answer, but because it's where so many security decisions ultimately become reality. With that foundation in place, I'm going to turn it over to Joe to discuss what the research actually tells us.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, not sure now. I am Joe Luterio. I'm a research associate at the Alert Center at Texas State University. I'm also a retired law enforcement officer from Brazil. And I was one of the researchers who worked in this project. Next, please. Sorry. So we analyzed all 54 active shooter incidents in schools from the year 2000 to 2025. So every single one of them, we relied on law enforcement records, court documents, after action reports, and as a third tier media reporting. We're going to see later on this data availability was a major limitation for this project. Next, please. Two takeaways from this project. So first, I promised my boss I wouldn't curse in this presentation. So lock your stuff up and keep it locked. Okay. Almost all the doors that led to victims were unsecured. We can place vault doors in classrooms. If they are not locked, they cannot protect anyone. So surprise, locked doors can protect people. The second takeaway is that glass isn't safe, and I especially refer to solid glass doors and those large side lights and glass panels. If you want to leave now and avoid my weird accent and my questionable sense of humor for the last couple of minutes. That's all you need to know. Really? Yeah, that's all. But since Alert pays me by the time, let's elaborate a little more. Um, the vast majority of incidents involve some sort of lockdown, but in some cases, the lockdown was initiated only after the attack was over. Timing matters. Next. And in most cases, in actually the vast majority of cases, the attack was over by the time police officers got there. Either either some civilian intervened in the attack, or the perpetrator suicided before police got there, or the perpetrator fled the scene. Next. In 23 of our 54 events, we found a documented door interaction, and by interaction, we mean attempt to open or breach a door or fire through some doors or windows. Here, we find the first limitation about availability and quality of the data. In many cases, we simply couldn't tell if there was some interaction or not. Those 23 events involved 66 doors, most of them classroom doors, but also some exterior doors and some office and hallway doors. Again, those results are very limited by data quality. We'll come back to this later. Next. Out of those 66 doors, perpetrators entered through 29 of them. And in, again, the vast majority of the cases, the door was already unsecured, either unlocked or propped open. And to be honest, those 10% of unknowns, I could bet they were unsecured either. Next. Mechanical breach attempts were very rare, only 9 cases. And in all of the successful ones, they got through glass and not through the door or by defeating the lock mechanism itself. In all the times a locking mechanism was tried to be breached, it wasn't defeated. So in every successful breach, the perpetrator bypassed the lock. Next. Thank you. And the implications of that depend on the type of the school, because in elementary schools, most perpetrators were outsiders. Therefore, our greatest concern is the exterior perimeter, keeping perpetrators out. On the other hand, in high schools and middle schools, most attackers were insiders, meaning we have to be more concerned about interior door, about locking students inside the classroom. And from these findings, we can take 8 policy recommendations. Next. And all of them stem from our 2 takeaways. You got to keep your doors locked. And remember that glass cannot protect you by itself. Next. First recommendation, we need functional interior locks. We need doors that are locked from the outside and locks that can be engaged from the inside. That's the most important recommendation we have here. Second recommendation, exterior doors, especially for elementary schools. So we need secure exterior doors and strict access control. Okay. We got to remember that even delaying access can save lives. Okay. It's not only about denying entry, delaying can save lives too. Third recommendation, upgrade glazing. Remember about glass. Glass by itself cannot protect you. So I'm no industry expert, so certainly there are people that were way more qualified than I am to talk about all the options to increase glass safety and security. But some ideas, laminated glass, security foam, and again, delay has protective value. If we can delay the entry, that's already an advance. Next. Oh, sorry, the fourth. Um, it's the fourth recommendation, but it's also extremely important. Compliance. The lack of compliance led to many, many casualties. We take the Uvalde incident as an example. So we need leadership and staff trained and held accountable for compliance. We need regular audits on doors, either their status or their functioning. And maintenance gotta be prioritized. Okay, next. Rapid lockdown. We need rapid alert mechanisms that can be triggered by any faculty or staff. We need trained staff, faculty, and students to lock down quickly. Drills, in other words. Next. Security strategies, safety strategies got to be tailored to school level. Remember, uh, on elementary schools, most attackers are outsiders, meaning that we need prioritize the exterior perimeter. And in high schools and middle schools, most attackers are insiders, meaning that we need to prioritize classroom security. Okay, so no one size fits all approach. Next. Just kind of a side note about magnetic strips. The problem is that under stress, people may forget to remove the strip, and that will probably create a door that appears to be secure, but it's not. So it's not a good idea. And I think from the research side, a very important recommendation, we need to standardize data collection. Court documents, police documents, oh, come back, please. Just a court documents, police documents, they are not focused on locks, on breaches, on doors, on things that we care about in this industry, in this kind of research. So we need to standardize this kind of data collection so that we can have access to better data. So better data will lead to better recommendations and better outcomes. Um, Next, please. So the full report is available through this QR code, and I'm open for questions.
So, Joe, somebody's asking if glass doors are not safe, why are they listed on the past guidelines if they have security rated glazing? Why include unsafe options in the guidelines or checklist?
And I think they
Um,
jumped this presentation there. You were 2 slides later about force protection and ballistic glazing for
yes,
glass.
exactly.
It's I think the
What I
understanding is
said is
glass alone.
exactly. Glass by
Yeah.
itself, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, someone is saying it took Nicholas Cruz less than a minute and 42 seconds to shoot 18 students through 3 classroom doors, some locked, some unlocked. If we protect children at school from fire with fire doors, what kind of doors should we protect children at school with? Thoughts from the panel appreciated.
Yeah. The data we have do not show that in many cases we had shots through doors. And again, if you have a locked door and the perpetrator decides to shoot through the door, the number of casualties tend to be smaller than if he gains access to the classroom. Um, I think if we start from the most relevant findings, so let's keep the doors locked first. Let's build a culture of compliance. Then we can start moving on to ballistic doors, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm not an industry expert. I just analyze the data. QR code doesn't seem to work. It's weird. I tested it.
Yeah,
Let me
we'll check
find a
we'll check
link here.
on the QR code. I think we may answer some of the questions as we work a little bit through the presentation. So I guess let's try to get a little bit further into the presentation and come back to some of the questions. Okay. Thanks, Joe. One of the things I appreciate most about the research is that it validates something many of us in the door opening industry have believed for a long time, that the door is rarely the root cause. Doors don't make decisions. They don't decide whether they'll be inspected. They don't decide whether a teacher receives training. They don't decide whether maintenance has enough funding. They simply either perform or don't perform based on the system surrounding them. And when I walk through a school, I don't just see doors. I see leadership, policies, inspection programs, maintenance practices, funding priorities. Every opening tells me something about the organization that's responsible for it. So if the door isn't the root cause, where do we look? Instead of immediately saying we need to fix this door, I think maybe we should ask a different question. What is the door trying to tell us? Because in lots of cases, the problem isn't just the opening, it's pointing us to something else in the security program. Usually it falls into one of these four areas. First, the opening itself. Does it have the right lock? Does it latch every time? Can it be secured from inside when it needs to be? Has the glazing been considered? Can authorized staff or first responders get in when they need to? Those are all questions about whether the opening is actually capable of doing its job when we expect it to. Second, people. Do we know how, if staff knows how to operate the openings correctly? Can they secure it quickly during an emergency? Are substitute teachers trained the same way? Do people understand not just how it works, but why it was designed to work that way? Because even the best hardware only works if people use it correctly. Third is procedures. What are the expectations for keeping doors secure every day? Who checks exterior doors? What happens during a lockdown? How are visitors managed? And just as importantly, what happens when someone finds a door that isn't working properly? Here's another question that I like to ask. Are your daily procedures encouraging people to work with the hardware or around it? If teachers are using magnets, like Joe just mentioned, wedges or other shortcuts just to get through the day, that's probably not a hardware problem. It's a sign that operations, procedures, and the opening aren't working together. And fourth is maintenance. Again, like Joe mentioned, does the door close completely? Does it latch every time? Are repairs made quickly? Are openings inspected routinely or only after someone notices a problem? Maintenance isn't just fixing broken hardware. It's making sure the opening continues to perform the way it was designed. The important thing is that these four areas all depend on each other. Great hardware can't overcome a door that's always propped open. Strong procedures can't make up for a lock that doesn't latch. Training can't solve a mechanical problem that no one reports. And maintenance can't fix policies that encourage people to defeat the hardware. Secure openings only happen when all of these four pieces work together. So as you think about your own facility, I'll leave you with one question. When you find a door that isn't performing the way it should, is your first instinct to fix the door, or do you stop and ask why it ended up that way? Because every deficiency is telling you a story, and the question is just, are we listening? So now that we've talked about looking beyond the door, the next question is, what should every secure opening actually do? No matter who makes the hardware, what type of lock it is, or how much technology you attach to it, every secure opening should consistently do a few basic things. First, it has to close. That sounds obvious, but if the door never closes, nothing else matters. It can't latch, it can't lock, it can't protect anybody. Second, it has to positively latch. A closed door isn't necessarily a secure door. If it's just resting against the frame and it can still be pushed open, that latch isn't actually securing the opening. Third, it needs to secure the room when it's needed. As Joe showed us, secured openings make a difference in real events. The question isn't just, does the door have a lock? It's, can the people inside secure it quickly and confidently when they needed to? Fourth, we have to look at the entire opening, not just the lock. The alert research showed us that the lock held just fine. The attacker simply came through the glass. That's why we have to evaluate the whole opening. Fifth, every opening has to allow free egress. Security and life safety are partners, not competitors. People have to always be able to get out quickly during an emergency. And sixth, the opening has to support authorized access. Teachers, administrators, law enforcement, emergency responders all need to get through certain doors when their responsibility requires it. And finally, every opening needs to be inspected and maintained. Even the best designed openings won't perform if no one is checking on it. Inspections, find problems. Maintenance keeps the opening ready to perform when it matters most. But here's the encouraging part, is that every one of these things on this list can be evaluated. Every one of them can be inspected, everyone can be maintained, and everyone can be improved. That's really what preparedness is all about. It's not waiting until an emergency happens. It's making sure your openings are ready before one ever does. One thing this comparison clearly illustrates is how classroom lock functions have evolved over time. The traditional classroom lock is locked with a key from the corridor side of the door. That means someone has to first gain access to the hallway side of the opening before the classroom can be secured. The security classroom lock was an important advancement after Columbine. It allowed for an authorized person inside the classroom to use the key to lock the outside lever or the trim without opening the door or stepping into the corridor. We knew that was an issue after the Columbine incident. That was a significant improvement, but school security guidance has continued to evolve. Today, leading guidance consistently emphasizes several key characteristics. First, the classroom should be capable of being secured from inside of the room, and it should be capable of being secured without a key. Second, occupants should be able to quickly determine that the door is actually locked. So an interior visual indicator could provide immediate confirmation and removes any uncertainty during a stressful event. And that keeps people from installing things on doors that shouldn't be installed on doors because they feel like that's giving them extra confidence that the door is secure. Some schools also put lock visual indicators on the corridor side because that helps staff or students identify a secure room or an open room during a lockdown and can help administrators or emergency responders to quickly assess whether a room is locked or not locked. So the progression is pretty simple. Traditional classroom locks, the key stays in the hallway. We haven't been recommending those types of locks for a long time now. Security classroom locks, the key comes into the classroom. But today's guidance tells you that the classroom should be secured from inside without a key, while providing occupants with immediate visual confirmation that the room is locked. This isn't saying that older lock functions were wrong. They were designed to meet the needs and expectations of their time. As we've learned from real world incidents, our expectations have changed. And today's guidance reflects those lessons by emphasizing speed, simplicity, and confidence during an emergency. So we've looked at research, hardware, procedures, people, maintenance, but ultimately every one of those decisions becomes visible in the opening itself. When I look at a classroom door, I'm no longer just evaluating hardware, I'm evaluating preparedness. If the door closes and positively latches, it tells me the room can be secured. If occupants can quickly secure the opening, it tells me protective actions can be implemented without unnecessary delays. If the opening maintains free egress, it tells me that the school has balanced security with life safety. If authorized personnel and emergency responders can gain access when it's needed, it tells me the opening support both security and emergency operations. If the glazing has been evaluated, it tells me the school has looked beyond the lock and considered the entire opening. And if the opening performs reliably day after day, it tells me something even more important. It tells me that the school has invested in inspections, maintenance, training, and continuous improvement. That's really the message of this presentation, that the door isn't simply a building component. It's one of the clearest indicators of the strength of the security program behind it. When we stop looking at doors as isolated pieces of hardware and begin viewing them as reflections of preparedness, they become one of the most valuable assessment tools we have. Every security plan eventually reaches a door. The question is, when it does, what story will your doors tell? Turning it over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Laura. So when we look at security and doors, anything kind of in the physical security, but particularly at doors, I always like to look at it as, these are kind of a last resort measure. So we're looking at, from a full security perspective, kind of the holistic approach, what can we do from a prevention and early intervention kind of standpoint, is obviously great to be talking about. But at the end of the day, push come to shove, the physical security aspect of things is kind of our last resort. We want to kind of, push that out and try to get farther away from the building, try to get away from that last line of defense as much as possible. And that's one of the areas where SEPTED really comes in helpful of, looking at, again, layers and how do we, layer protection so that we're not relying solely on, one locked door to prevent one of these tragedies from happening. So we look then at, obviously with pass and things, if you go to the next slide. Pass has layers that are, we look at as building from the district down to, the campus and building perimeter to the, the interior classroom and interiors of the buildings. And that's kind of those last three are where physical security kind of lives and how we can look at what can we do to kind of push that threat out and, prevent and get, early intervention into, the dealing with the threats so that we're not relying solely on the physical attributes of the door. SEPTED looks at things like, the natural surveillance, natural access control, are two of the big parts of, we want to see people coming before they get to the building. We want to be able to control that movement so that we know what, can kind of guess what their intentions may be from if they're taking the, approved path or if they're in non-approved areas. So what does security mean? You can next slide here. And so when we look at security, we don't look at it from a sense solely of, do we feel welcome? Do we not feel welcome? Do we look at, we're looking at the idea that we want people to be coming onto the campus and feel like they belong in the areas we want them to feel like they belong. So SEPTA looks at that and like natural access control on what's that path and, the intended path that we're putting people on versus just an area that they can meander around and get to things. So like even for these two slides, both opening, both welcoming, but you can see that from the entrance perspective, the one on the left here, a little bit harder to see with some of the trees and vegetation built around that entrance versus kind of keeping everything very open and low around the entrance so that you have those good sight lines that look out around everything that you can kind of see. Next slide. So, and this kind of goes into, also addressing the human behavior. Like I said, we, look at natural access control of, where's, if somebody, I always explain as if somebody says first time at the site, what are the cues that are going to tell them where to go without having any knowledge of what the intention of the design is? Are they naturally going to be drawn to the entrance of the building? Are they naturally going to know which way to go in, once they get up to certain points, or is it confusing? And we have to address it with signage, or you have to have special knowledge of where you're supposed to go and get into things. So, in trying to address that from the human behavior, we look at those things. The can the visitor find the office? Can the staff see the entrances so that they can monitor them? Do students know where they can go to get to safety? When if first responders show up, are they going to be able to orient themselves and get around the building, or are they just going to be chasing a maze and having difficulties kind of getting through? You can next slide. So again, as security is always part of the system, and we talk about doors here today, but that is just like one little component that fits into the overall here of from not just the architecture. We touched a little bit on technology. There with doors alone, there's a lot that can kind of go into the technology aspect to deal with a lot of the issues that people seem to have with those. Yes, there's some costs that go into that. And we look at those and we try to balance out where the cost benefits are for those versus if we did something different, we change a policy, we can do procedures. The other part is we can't have policies and procedures that don't match the physical aspects of what the building has. So if you can have a great key card policy, but if your building doesn't have key card access, no, it's a policy nobody's going to be following and things. Then as Laura mentioned, maintenance is a big part of it. If the door doesn't work properly, it's going to be a problem for people to get to use it correctly. Potential left open. People trying to circumnavigate the intended kind of access control is always an issue. The number of times we do security audits and find the rocks, the thing, bricks, the creative things that people find and leave to be able to prop a door open. Because it's convenience to them. I'm running out real quick. It's not a big deal. Um, yeah, it's a tough one to do, and I think that to somebody's question earlier, there's a culture of that when we talk about security, and that's something that we look at when we audit schools. And what's the security culture here? Are people cognizant of the importance of why we need to do that? And things, and it not just from a here's the policy, here's the punishment, um, but when we see people kind of own the security culture, it becomes second nature to them. I've been on school sites where, every person from, the principal down to the janitor knows and understands the what's and whys of why we're doing things. And if they encounter anybody who is where they shouldn't be, they are responsible to get that person back to the office and hand them off. It's not just to point them in this direction and send them on their way. They kind of all understand that they take responsibility for somebody wandering around in the building so that they can kind of keep them. And from a visitor standpoint, that becomes something that you really quick understand. You're not going to wander this building. Somebody's going to see you. Somebody's going to point you in this direction. If you don't go with them, they're going to stand there and start making calls, and it just it is what it is. So you're going to be facing that. Um, so I don't go to the next slide here. I don't see Kevin jumping back on. So,
Okay,
but I
so
think that yeah, if you would take that, Laura, I can take it.
sure. So as we wrap up, and we're gonna take questions next, but we'd like to leave you with 5 ideas that we hope you'll take back to your schools and organizations. The first being locked doors work. We understand that from Joe's research. We understand that from, all the events that have been studied over the years. The research shows that secure doors can stop movement, can influence the outcome of an incident. That's why making sure your doors can be secured quickly and reliably is so important. Number two, doors only work when they're maintained. Even the best designed openings can't perform if it doesn't close, latch, lock properly. We know that from multiple instances, especially the Uvalde event, that there were definitely difficulties with maintenance in multiple openings that affected the outcome of that event. Inspection and maintenance are not optional. They need to be a part of preparedness. Glass deserves attention. We were for a long time, schools were trying to put all kinds of um, different locking devices on doors to fortify the doors and leaving the glass unprotected and vulnerable. And we know that most instances where they were able to get through a door, it was through the glass itself. So the glass deserves attention. Joe showed us that glazing was a reoccurring vulnerability in several documented instances. So we need to evaluate the entire opening, not just the lock. Compartmentation or compartmentalization saves lives. PASS has a white paper out on compartmentalization. Every secured opening can help slow movement and create valuable time for occupants to respond and for first responders to arrive. So lots of those doors that we already have in place for fire protection can be used in lots of cases for security as well. And those doors are already there. Joe said that if we can slow people down the movement through the building, that's just as important as getting them secured behind a locked door. And preparedness is more than just hardware. Maybe the biggest takeaway is that security isn't created by one product. It's created by leadership, planning, thoughtful design, trained people, effective procedures, properly functioning hardware, and ongoing maintenance. So your doors are telling you something. Are you listening? Every one of those elements contribute to the story that your doors are telling you. There's lots of resources that PASS provides. If you go onto PASS K-12, there's obviously the safety and security guidelines. There's the school safety checklist. There's the white paper on barricade devices and why to avoid them. Like I said, the compartmentation white paper. There's continuously white papers added. One of the strengths of PASS is that we don't just identify challenges, we try to provide practical resources to help schools address them. If today's discussion raised questions about your own facilities, these publications are an excellent place to continue that conversation. So on behalf of the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, I'd like to thank all of the presenters for sharing their expertise today. And we also want to thank each of you for investing your time and improving the safety and security of your schools and communities. And I'm going to open it for questions.
So, a question that came in that has come up, earlier in things is the just the instances of people being shot through doors, and the use of bulletproof doors. Kind of address that. So that is one of the things that we have looked at and trying to kind of started to address in the last update with PASS. And I will say that the challenge becomes is first we can't ever say bulletproof. There's no such thing as bulletproof. They're ballistically rated. They're rated for a certain type of caliber, certain type of projectile, and at a certain speeds, everything like that. And to understand that there's only for so many rounds. So even a ballistically rated door will fail eventually. If it's rated for 3 rounds or 5 rounds, the next round can come through. So even putting top of the line ballistic rated doors in does not guarantee that rounds don't come through. It just means that it's going to, it's intended to stop the first couple rounds. The other issue is expense. I'd love to see every classroom corridor and, in schools have, ballistic ratings, to the highest level. The issue becomes, those doors, those frames that they need to go onto those doors are significantly larger, thicker than a standard door frame. So everything expense-wise for the wall in the corridor going down the classroom corridor goes up in expense. I don't have a figure on 100%, tenfold, whatever, but it is expensive. So what we looked at with PASS and the way we try to address that is from the layer aspect of things. So what doors should be prioritized for getting ballistic force protection rating, and our goal being that we want to push the threat out of the building. As horrible as some of these events have been, it looks like some the last kind of research that I've seen and the Secret Service reports is that more and more of these events are happening outside the building. We've started to do a good job of trying to prevent things from getting inside. There's still instances where things are getting inside the building. They're very rare things. But if we can stop the gun from getting into the building, I think a lot of those type of shootings, into the classrooms, go down as well. So, main entrance doors, exterior doors, building separation doors, those are the layers I look to build first because that keeps the threat as far out, from the student as possible. And, it's less expense because I have less doors to deal with that I can focus and do a little bit more there. Um, but I think that's I think the hardest kind of it'd be great. I think in the past guidelines there are recommendations in there for the tier four plus kind of recommendations that if you have it, you got the money. Here's where you can rate the doors. You have to make sure the walls adjacent to the doors are rated. But you're starting to look at big expenses, and it's still not a guarantee that rounds aren't coming through those. It's just how many do they stop initially.
Another question came through, Ben, that you might be good to answer. If perimeter security is a higher risk on elementary schools, how do you balance the need for perimeter fences with the everyday risk of students leaving school grounds with the egress gates on the fencing?
So it gets into again kind of layers. One of the layers that I will always talk about is a standoff distance. So if I'm dealing with more of a rural school where my standoff distances are going to be greater, meaning where my public private property lines, in even a public school, but like the school property versus public sidewalk or something like that, um, begin. If I've got, hundreds of feet worth of standoff distance from play fields, parking lots, things like that, I'm a little less concerned about, somebody getting up on top of that because now, if we, again, good SEPTED practices, but if I can see that threat coming across all that standoff area, we can start to intervene and we can start to deal with it. Now, when you're dealing something with maybe like an urban school where the building is sitting right onto the sidewalk, you don't have an option for kind of the standoff and fencing in areas like that. So again, if the concern is, students leaving the school grounds, layers work the same in both directions. So if I've got a standoff distance where I'm worried about the threat coming from the outside, making it through my, buffer layer to the building, to the student area, to that fencing line that, the outside play area or something, the same holds true of, student going the other direction. They're not just going to go out that gate and then just disappear. They're going to have to get through that buffer zone in the other direction that we have time that we can kind of intervene. We can kind of, deal with that. Um, if you're in an area that requires, egress out of a play area, and again, that it's a fire code thing, and there's not much in the fire codes for once you're outside, that's kind of considered the safe area because we're outside the building and the combustible zone. Um, but there's still some guidelines on that, yeah, you need to have egress gates, and there's ways that you can secure those so that, somebody can't come in, but you can have that free egress. And the same free egress doesn't mean they can hit that and go. There's multiple ways you can still have free egress from delayed, alarmed, kind of egress, meaning that from the time they hit that crash bar, that door doesn't have to open immediately. You can, depending on, again, the code requirements there, anything I've seen from, 10 seconds, 30 seconds to a minute, you have to hold that while it alarms before that egress, that door or gate unlocks. And that is one of those areas that prevents somebody from just being able to get out from a, free egress area that we want to have a little security going in the other direction as well. I hope that answers, and it's not just ramblings of.
I think that was good. There's a question that came through. What lock function on classrooms would be your first recommendation? Push button with indicator, storeroom, or something else? I found that the push button to offer both convenience and security. The storeroom seems to be where teachers use magnets and prop the door open. just curious on your thoughts on this as people often sacrifice security for convenience. So I think if we
Yeah.
just follow the recommendations that we see both in the ASIS school security guidelines or the school security standard or in the past guidelines, as long as you have a lock that's lockable from the inside, the best way to probably do it is a thumb turn or a push button, something that anybody could go to the door and lock the door. You don't have to have a key to lock the door. Um, the storeroom lock is great because every time you close the door is locked, and most schools have now the requirement that during the day all the classroom doors are locked. But because somebody has to approach the door and let students back in because they, are going out for any number of reasons to use the restroom or to go to another class or, run to the office, the inconvenience of letting them back in is there with the storeroom lock. But, really, you have to make sure that everybody understands how the doors operate. If your doors are locked all the time, regardless of your lock, you're going to have that same inconvenience. But security really needs to be the priority, and even if, a process might be inconvenient, really the process needs to probably change to make the facility more secure. Anybody have any different thoughts on that? And I think definitely the indicator lets people know that the door is locked. I think one of the things when we hear people are attaching other things to doors, it's because they feel like that thing on the door is giving them some sense of security. They know the door is locked because they can see whatever that, cover over the closer or different things like that, that people try to attach to doors that are not code compliant. Um, Having an indicator lets you know that a mechanical lock or an electric lock or electrified lock is secure, and lets you do that in a code compliant way.
Go ahead,
Anybody
Joe.
have any different? Yeah, go Joe.
Let me just compliment that. It's good that you brought that up about the convenience. I can't recall from the top of my head which of them, but one of the attacks was actually stopped because of the locked door. The student got out to the bathroom, set up for the attack. When they came back and tried to open the door was locked, and the faculty members saw the student was armed outside and denied entry. So we had a frustrated attack because of that quote unquote inconvenience. Um, Based on that fact that people will always choose convenience over safety, I would go for any lock that would stay locked from the outside by default, that couldn't be easily unlocked, and maybe some device. I like to make comparisons, analogies with traffic rules. So how do you make people wear the seatbelt? Well, you put an alarm that will start bugging you if you don't put that seatbelt on, and will get worse as time goes by without the seatbelt. So some alarm at the door, if the door is unlocked, will sound something like that. I would go for something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add that, if whenever we're dealing with schools, it always seems like the questions on security is very situational. And, are we talking, retrofit? Are we talking new? Are we talking, what are we talking budget wise and things? All of that kind of plays into it, particularly the budget. Yeah, because, we know we have limited resources. In the world of like, unlimited resources and, whatever. I'm a tech guy, so like I lean towards into like electric locks on new, because there's so many other features that you can utilize them for, that hard keyed lock can't do. If I go to electrified locks, I can go to door monitoring switches, I can go to lock monitoring switches. So from admin kind of security mindset, I can pull up a map of the building to see every door if it's open, closed, locked, unlocked. And kind of have a better situational awareness. From a key card application, I can, get very creative with my control groups on who has access to what when, and, being able to eliminate that person's access at, a flick of a couple keys and allow somebody else access remotely. There's just there's so much that you can do with that. The trade-off there is obviously it's technology. You got to have somebody who can understand and run that system. And that's an area I've seen get complicated in schools where we can come in with the greatest technology solution and it all gets turned off because nobody knows how to manage it. Therefore, it's not working properly. And our only option was to just dumb it down to its basic principles or turn it off. And then you have a lot of money invested in stuff that's not getting used. So those are all the things that we're trying to find and balance in there, on how those will get used. But yeah, there's a lot on kind of the electronic lock that, you know, kind of what Lauren Joba said, like that can be locked at all times. And then, your staff is carrying a key card that's their ID or hanging around their neck. They can get into the rooms they need to without having to worry about pulling a key out, doing something. You can have those time locks so that when the bell rings in between classes, those proper door, the doors that need to be unlocked, unlock. And then when class starts again, those all lock back down. So staff and students can move when they need to without being restricted. And then they're again secure when they need to be secure. But like I said, the trade-off there is one little glitch in your system and nothing's working properly. And as Kevin demonstrated for us this beginning of this, it happens. Best of intentions, and it's still just it happens.
So it looks like it was Appalachia in Georgia. That was the school incident. Okay, does anybody
Just say,
else
Max, I don't
have
know if you
any?
were monitoring some of the other questions that we might have missed or something in the chat as it was going through.
There was a question about grant recommendations I saw that came through. Does anybody have any recommendations on available grants that are out there?
Where's Kevin when we need him?
Yeah, right. And we lost Kevin.
He's a great resource on grants, and what's kind of out there. And I mean, he'd be able to tell you. I know there's certain sites that kind of monitor that and allow, you can research. I just don't know what they are. But yeah, we'll make him do some homework and send follow-up emails. There it is, schoolsafe.gov grant finder.
So if anybody else has any other questions that they think of afterwards, you can send those to passk12.org /contact. And any of us would be glad to help you with that. Again, these are today's presenters. Thank you, Ben Crum, Joe Eleuterio, myself, Laura Fry Weaver, and we lost Kevin early on. We have on August 5th coming up, digital mapping and 911 is the next PASS 26 summer webinar. And thanks to everybody for joining.